Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Schools Climate Summit, which is part of London Climate Action Week. My name is Marlene Imhera, and I'm a co-chair of the London Climate Action Week Education Group. It's my privilege to welcome you to today's session. This is the first of our thematic sessions on the issue of campus, and I'm pleased to hand over to my co-chair, Martin Crabb, who's going to introduce our first host school, Glebe School. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you. Oh, I'm unmuted. Great. Thank you, Marlene. That's great. So I'm delighted to be here today from Glebe School, my school, talking about the campus, and we're very proud of our campus. The campus theme, I'm just going to read you a bit of blurb about it, in case you're not sure. The summit uses a whole school approach to address the climate challenge faced by schools. We use the shorthand, the 4 C's and the 1 F. The first C examines the role of the school estate, the campus, in emissions reduction, adaptation, resource flows and procurement, covering food, energy, waste, water and land. And we use the FEWWL acronym, FEWWL, etc. And we want to think about how can school leaders, governors and policymakers respond to the new critical infrastructure agenda. In case you're wondering what the other 3 C's and an F are, they are curriculum, community, careers and finance. So today we're going to kick off with a short video from my school, and I've been at this school since 1996, a long time, and it's a special school, and I'm really proud to be coming from this school because we do lots of work in the school grounds, especially and around the school campus, and it's not just something that I do, it's something that lots of the staff do. And today we have a whole school event going on where all of the curriculum has been disbanded, and teachers and young people are working on a variety of climate action projects for the day. So it's a really exciting day. And after the video is gone, I'm going to leave the formal summit and go and take part in the day.
Hi, I'm Ian Travis. I'm the head teacher of Glebe School. We're a special school in the London Borough of Bromley, and we're absolutely delighted and excited to be a lighthouse school for what is London's first climate summit for schools. Today we'll be doing a deep dive that focuses on the school campus, and we'll be looking into issues around food waste, water, eco-fashion and much, much more. Good luck to everyone.
So we're here in the Wild area, and this is where our banquet is going to be, and we're going to have some tasty foods: apples, carrots, strawberries and potatoes. For example, we're going to have strawberry cheesecake, apple pie, carrot cake and jacket potatoes.
As you can see, we're really lucky to have the school campus that we've got, and we use it to great effect across the curriculum, inside and out. But today we're coming off the curriculum, off the timetable, and we're working on a special climate project. And I hope you have a great day wherever you're working too, because we certainly will.
Martin, that's so fantastic.
Yeah, embarrassing.
Thank you so much. It's just put a smile on my face, and I think everybody else who's watching it. You're fantastic. Your school is brilliant, and
Brilliant.
have a wonderful day. We'll see you at
Thanks,
the
guys.
session.
Thanks, Paul. Sorry, I'm leaving you, Paul, but have a great day. Thank you for doing it. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, Martin. And I'm
Bye-bye.
delighted to hand over to Paul Toyne, who's going to chair our session on campus. And Paul is a dear colleague, a fellow commissioner with the London Sustainable Development Commission, and also the practice leader on sustainability at the eminent firm Grimshaw's. Paul, over to you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melanie, and also thank you, Martin. Just if you're wondering, the background to my here is the Eden project, and Grimshaw were the designers with Eden. So I thought that might make a nice backdrop, and also, of course, the big theme around climate action, around net zero. So today, particularly on the theme of campus, we've got a really exciting lineup for discussion around how schools can act more collaboratively to deliver very important objectives around sustainability, particularly emissions reduction, going on to adaptation and resilience. However, before I get to introduce the panelists, I'd like to introduce Emma Howard-Boyd, who unfortunately cannot be here today, but because of the wonderful ways of working these days with technology, we have a video presentation. Now, Emma is the global ambassador for the Race to Zero and the Race to Resilience, all in the lead up to COP26 in Glasgow at the end of this year. And she's also the chair of the UK Environment Agency. So we're going to play a very short video with Emma's address.
Thank you for inviting me to address the School Climate Summit as part of London Climate Action Week. Last year, more than 50 million people were affected by droughts, floods and storms. Last week, the Committee on Climate Change published a report about how well the UK is prepared for these escalating risks. It said that while positive action has been taken to tackle some climate risks, most notably flooding and water scarcity, wider progress is not keeping pace with increasing risk, and no government department is moving at the pace required. The Greater London Authority's Climate Adaptation Guidance says, in London, climate change will exacerbate existing pressures on housing, critical infrastructure, including schools, services and the natural environment, by causing more frequent and widespread flooding, scarcity of water resources and increased heat risk. In her foreword to how London schools and early years settings can adapt to climate change, Shirley Rodriguez, London's Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy, says, these impacts will not be evenly distributed amongst Londoners. Children, as one of the at-risk groups, are particularly vulnerable. Their lack of experience and knowledge can hamper their ability to adjust behaviours and leave them dependent on teachers and other adults for guidance. How on earth a teacher is supposed to keep children focused on physics or history or English literature after lunch in a heat wave, I just don't know. The impacts of extreme heat on pupil attainment are under-examined, but I am inclined towards the view of Harriet, Chief Executive of climate charity Ashden, who said, it's common sense that we all learn better when we're not too hot or too cold. Adapting schools so that they are prepared for climate impacts has been long neglected by school leaders, policymakers and politicians. A proper risk-based approach to climate resilience in the schools and the education sector is urgently needed. Last June, 52 leading environment and education organisations wrote to the Chancellor calling for substantial investments into the UK education estate. The letter said the education system can and will play a pivotal role in helping transition society towards a net zero future, and the buildings the next generation are educated in must be at the heart of this. Net zero is getting a lot of attention in the run-up to the COP26 climate conference later this year, and that's a good thing. But we also need to think about the climate emergency in terms of water, whether that's too little water in a drought, water quality and pollution, or too much water in a flood. According to the Government Climate Change Risk Assessment, over 10,700 schools are at significant flood risk. This is expected to increase by 4,000 by 2050 in a 2-degree future. 643 London schools are at risk from a 1 in 30-year flood. At the Environment Agency, we are showing that net zero and adapting to climate impacts are not mutually exclusive. The benefits of creating healthy green and blue spaces include locking in carbon, slowing the flow of surface water, creating habitats for nature, providing urban cooling, which could reduce emissions from air conditioning, and they also have an important role in levelling up. Just 35% of households with annual incomes below £10,000 are within a 10-minute walk of a publicly accessible natural green space. This is an issue for urban planning as a whole, but providing such spaces in the school estate would improve students' health and well-being. This is something addressed in the Mayor's document, Reimagining Rainwater in Schools, which looks at sustainable drainage systems. Sustainable urban drainage systems, which include features like rain planters, rain gardens, ponds and swales, help manage the flow of rainwater by capturing, using, absorbing, storing and transporting rainfall. They reduce the amount of rainfall that drains into sewers, streams and rivers. They can also treat and reduce pollutants in runoff. And they can be creatively used in all key stages as most subjects of the curriculum, linking to science, maths, creative writing and geography. Creating a green and blue space at school may seem like a minor intervention in terms of a global climate emergency, but the combined school estate of over 24,000 sites covers a land area larger than the size of Birmingham. Many puddles make a river. Schools use enormous amounts of water every day and lose significant amounts due to leakage. The Department for Education estimate that there is potential to reduce the daily water leakage in schools by the equivalent of 1.6 million people's daily water consumption. The Environment Agency are supporting their water strategy, looking to address this and flood risk to schools. Individual schools can seek advice from local water companies and retailers, plus specialist leakage reduction firms for site-specific action plans. I'd encourage you to join the campus deep dive session organised by the Department for Education this afternoon to find out more about managing your climate-related water risks. Finally, as this is the Schools Climate Summit, I want to say something about jobs. In May, the Green Alliance put out a report called Jobs for a Green Recovery. It said investing in green initiatives produces more jobs per pound invested than traditional infrastructure like fossil fuel power generation. A healthier environment would directly increase productivity via tourism, fishing or agriculture, but also indirectly through improved air quality, urban cooling and reduced sickness. And a thriving natural environment mitigates the impacts of weather events, saving money. There are close to 9 million children at school in England today. Whatever they do after school, their lives will be highly affected by climate shocks. We need to make accessing science, technology, engineering and mathematics more inclusive and create equal opportunities to enter early career programmes in the environmental sector. All organisations will increasingly need people who have the skills to manage the climate emergency. And that is an opportunity for today's students. I attended the climate rally when Greta Thunberg visited Bristol at the beginning of last year. The young crowd that day illustrated how much today's generation of students want to take action to tackle the climate emergency and nature's decline. As teachers help children to discover their place in our changing world, the schools where this happens should embrace climate change actions too. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, that was fantastic, Emma. Thank you ever so much for that. A very comprehensive review of some of the challenges and issues, together with some of the stats that puts things into context. So that was a wonderful way to open our session on campus. Before we get started and build on some of the comments that Emma kindly shared with us, just a bit of housekeeping on how we're going to run this. First of all, if you could all just go to mute, that would be really helpful to reduce any background sounds. And the mute button can be found on the bottom left of your screen. So if you can see the icons that have participation, share screen, etc., go to the extreme left and click on there, and you'll be unmuted. That'd be wonderful. The other thing just to say is we have a Q&A panel there as well, which again we would encourage all of you, when appropriate, when you've got a thought and a question that you want to ask the panelists, to put your question in the Q&A chat room, and I'll do my very best to ask that question. And of course we may run out of time, and apologies if we don't get to your question, but I'll attempt to do that. And we'll hopefully have about 15 minutes at the end where we can have a more wider ranging discussion with the Q&As. Anyhow, to get us through this process, we've got 5 experts, panelists, who are going to speak for a brief amount of time with a specific perspective around activities on the campus. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to not introduce them all to you now. I'll do it when appropriate. And so first, I'd like to introduce to you Jonathan Clear. And Jonathan is in the planning performance, is the planning performance and risk director at the Department for Education. And Jonathan's challenge is to describe to us what his department is doing with respect to climate change and sustainability for the education sector. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Paul, and hello everyone. I'm Jonathan Clear, and as Paul says, I'm a director at the Department for Education, and one of the things I'm responsible for is developing a strategy around sustainability and climate change for the education, skills and children's social care system. I'm actually beaming in live from Mersham Primary School in Surrey, where I'm taking part in a planting day as part of how the Department for Education is directly supporting schools adapt to climate change. This school actually flooded last year during an intense rainstorm, and we're using sustainable drainage systems to reduce the risk of flooding in the future. They also add much needed greenery and biodiversity to an otherwise pretty grey looking playground. And even better, the children get involved and do the planting, connecting them to nature and helping them learn about plants and sustainability. It's a fantastic day so far. And if you get any noise from outside, it's because it's playtime and I can hear them all kicking footballs around, presumably getting ready for England versus Germany later this afternoon. But I would like to start by saying a big thank you to London Climate Action Week for inviting me to speak today. Everyone at this virtual conference, myself included, shares a common mission: to adapt to climate change, to help get to net zero carbon emissions, and to help make the planet a better place for future generations. And I'm here today to talk to you about what we're doing at the Department for Education, and most importantly, to listen to the views and evidence of everyone here today to help inform our strategy. Climate change and sustainability matters. I'm sure we can all agree that. And there are some astonishing facts about the education sector, which is made up of schools, further and higher education. It's responsible for 39% of all direct public sector emissions. Just schools on their own are 25% of the total. There are over 24,000 schools, most with multiple buildings. And I think I'm right in saying the London campus includes at least 3,000 of those schools. We heard a stat from the video that the school estate is approximately the size, I think it was Birmingham. The stat I have, it's 33 times the size of the city of Westminster, but it also has a roof area equivalent to 16,000 football pitches. and there are almost 12 million people in England under the age of 19, of which almost 9 million are in school. Now think of all the journeys travelled for school drop-off and pick-up. That is, by any count, a lot of people, a lot of buildings, and a lot of emissions. So what are we doing here at the Department for Education? Well, firstly, we have a dedicated sustainability and climate change team in recognition of the importance of the issue. Secondly, we have a lead minister, Baroness Berridge, who is a passionate, enthusiastic, and proactive leader about the impact we can have across the whole education system. And thirdly, as mentioned, we're developing a strategy, which I'll come back to in a moment. Now, you might say that that isn't a lot, but there are actually already a multitude of initiatives and policies in train. It's just they're not necessarily all joined up and set out clearly for everyone to understand. For example, we've changed our building design standards so that all newly built schools are net zero carbon in operation. And we're soon, hopefully, to make it net zero carbon in construction as well. We work actively with schools to help them understand risks from climate change, become more resilient to extreme weather and flooding, and doing this in a way that has wider benefits to pupils. For example, here at Merson Primary School, we could have reduced the flood risks just by using flood doors. But working in collaboration with the head, we devised a solution using a mix of modern drainage and planters that have, of course, it's reduced the flood risk, but it also offsets carbon emissions, it's improving the learning environment for the children, and it engages them in nature and activities, which helps make a positive difference to their environment. Directly relevant to London Climate Action Week, the FE are working closely with Thames Water and the Greater London Authority to find ways to reduce water usage. And similarly, we're taking action to reduce energy consumption in schools through rollout of smart meters. And we're working very closely with employers, other parts of government, and the further and higher education sectors to make sure we are training and educating people to be able to work in the green economy. Green jobs and the increasing number of people, especially young people who get higher technical qualifications and skills, is absolutely vital for the country to help adapt to climate change and seize the opportunities from new technologies. Now, with regards to the strategy itself, I want to share with you the 4 strategic aims which we are using to organise and communicate the policies and programmes we aim to deliver. Now, I should be clear, these 4 aims are not yet government policy. We're refining them as we're engaging with people and hearing their views. And I'll be talking to ministers about these later in the week after this event. Unsurprisingly, our first aim is net zero by 2050, and that's mainly about buildings and transport. Our second aim is about adaptation and resilience to climate change, mainly about mitigating water-related risks and overheating. The third is a better environment for future generations, for example, improving biodiversity and reducing waste. And lastly, the fourth aim is excellence in climate education, which of course is much more about teaching and lessons and how we build the skills for the green economy. Against each one of those aims, we put together a long list of ideas for ministers to consider over the next few weeks. The ideas to date have been based on a mixture of engagement with young people and a range of external organisations, by talking to other government departments and looking at wider government strategies such as the 25-year environment plan, and through the expertise within the department itself and other government departments. I'm meeting with the Secretary of State in about 2 weeks' time to go through that long list and identify those areas he and other ministers would like us to develop further. As you can imagine, the long list covers everything from moving to electric school buses, looking at ways to improve the school estate, all the way through to how we can support teachers and get the best out of the curriculum. With finances tight, however, it will be important for us and schools to select those ideas which have the biggest bang for our buck. Unfortunately, we can't afford to do everything, so taking the time to rigorously appraise the options is an important next phase of what we're doing, and to make sure we have the best chance to secure funding for initiatives at the next spending review, which is how government departments get funding from the Treasury. Now, of course, I don't have time to share with you all the ideas today, but I would like to talk you through one idea in a little more detail. We would like to launch a 20-year programme to improve biodiversity of the school estate and connect students to nature via a Duke of Edinburgh style award. There is evidence that shows that access to nature has positive impacts on physical health, mental health and well-being. There's also evidence that improving biodiversity has a positive impact on the environment, wildlife and resilience to climate change. We're hoping to partner with a range of organisations such as the Royal Geographic Society, Kew Gardens, Woodland Trust and other similar organisations And we would like to create a national schools nature park comprising all school land where students conduct wildlife surveys and help map and grow the biodiversity of their school over time. Pupils would log the data onto a national system, which then scores the level of biodiversity, provides advice on how to make improvements, including how to access resources such as free saplings, seeds and planters, activities for young people to get engaged with in their local community, and offering comparisons with other schools and with the ability to exchange ideas and virtually visit other schools for inspiration. The award element would be similar to the current Duke of Edinburgh Awards, where there are different levels of achievement with specific activities linked to each of our partner organisations. For example, tree planting with the Woodland Trust or improving biodiversity with Kew Gardens. We're in the middle of exploring the chance for royal patronage and inspiring venues where people can come and receive the award. And I should say, though we've spoken with various young people and organisations, we're at idea stage, so I can't claim to have everyone signed up yet, but it's about sharing the sort of ideas with you as a community. And we want to make that award inclusive and available to all, pupil-led, a low burden on schools and teachers, but of course, we would love everyone to be involved. We want to make it meaningful for the school through having a better environment, being more resilient to climate change, and seeing better educational outcomes. We want it to be meaningful for the individuals through improved self-confidence, feeling part of something big and amazing, and gaining a sense of accomplishment, but also having something that helps them progress into further or higher education or into great jobs via apprenticeships. We hope the programme will inspire young people to connect with nature, learn new skills, and have a positive impact on the environment. We also hope to build a database and evidence that provides views about how we are collectively improving biodiversity at a large scale with a national schools nature park bursting with wildlife, helping provide a better environment for future generations. If we get it right, there's an opportunity to have an incredible impact on biodiversity at a really, really large scale. Thank you for taking the time to listen to what we're doing at the Department for Education. And I look forward to hearing from my fellow speakers and for your comments and questions in the Q&A session. Thank you. Back to Paul.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was really encouraging and great to hear about your future initiatives. I just had a question that popped up in my mind really, and it reflects a couple of comments that are coming through, and I guess it's about the challenge of new initiatives, for example, biodiversity enhancement, but also making sure that the ecological footprint through procurement in schools is also managed effectively. And going back to your earlier comment around some of the barriers and challenges about silo thinking, how will what you're putting in place break down those barriers?
Yeah, so of course there's loads of really difficult barriers, and I mentioned funding as one of those, and two others that come from that. One is, as you say, there is so much stuff going on here. There's a risk we spread resources way too thinly across too many initiatives, and we don't have that sort of impact that we need. It's also a crowded space. Department for Education, as a central government department, could get in the way and actually make things harder and more difficult for those organisations that are already being proactive and making things happen. But let me talk a little bit about the point about the supply chain and through schools. So as part of our strategy and some of the ideas we're putting to ministers is we have a schools commercial team within the department that looks specifically about things like how we're buying, how we're purchasing energy. We're looking at putting in place commercial frameworks, for example. So at Mersham School here, we're piloting purchasing and installing planters and using children obviously to do the planting. But we're looking at putting in place a framework so all schools can simply buy rainwater planters to help them. And we're looking at all the way down through the supply chain, making sure that all of our suppliers we buy for meet rigorous environmental standards, and that we're using our purchasing power as a force for good.
Thank you for that. I've got other questions to ask, but I think we should move on. I'm really keen to get everybody involved, the panelists, and also the audience. So just a reminder for those of you who are in the audience, if you've got an advertisement about some of the networks and efforts that you're involved in, which I believe some people have already put down in the Q&A, please do that. We'd be delighted to know more. And then if you have specific questions for any of the panelists, please put your question in the Q&A chat box And again, we'll do our best to try and get some of them answered. So let's move on to the second panelist. And it's a great delight to have Emma Knights, OBE, who's the Chief Executive of the National Governors Association. And Emma, she's been challenged really to be thinking about how climate change must be a strategic issue for school boards and give a perspective about what the National Governors Association's thinking is at the moment. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Paul, for inviting me to be part of this. I'm feeling very humbled because everybody else, not just on the panel, I'm sure in the audience as well, knows an awful lot more about climate change and environmental sustainability than I do. But I think if we want to make real change in the school sector, we've absolutely got to get this issue embedded into the schools or trusts' vision and strategy. So that's what I'm going to talk about with you relatively briefly, but I think if that's the thing you take away from my intervention at the end of this, I'll be really pleased. The idea of actually getting environmental sustainability built into your schools or trusts vision or strategy, because otherwise we really are in danger of, in fact, you've already mentioned it, the silo thinking. And there are lots of wonderful projects and initiatives out there, I know, and I'm sure a lot of people here today represent those and are doing great work. But unless we really get the organisations to embed this issue in absolutely all aspects of what they're doing, we're really not going to get the level of change that we all want. And I'm really aware this is a very diverse audience. So just very briefly, what do governing boards do? They set the vision, values, ethos and strategy for the school or trust. They hold the head teacher or the chief executive to account for that school's or trust's performance. They manage resources, so oversee finances. Those are the DFE's agreed 3 objectives. NGA, we have a 4th, because we think engaging stakeholders and listening to stakeholders is an absolutely fundamental part of good governance, and it's really relevant to this issue. So how do you go about actually making sure you do have a whole school or trust approach? Firstly, you want to make sure in your vision that this is not just referenced, but it becomes one of your strategic priorities. So we produce guidance for state schools. We represent and support state schools in England, and we produce guidance about how to go about setting a vision and strategy. So I'm not going to take you through the whole process, and when I'm finished, I'll put the link in the chat so you can have a look. But you know, vision, where do you want your school or trust to be in 3 or 5 years time? We're not in the business, NGA, of telling you what you should put into your school's vision. That's up to you all, knowing your context and your values, building on your values to do. But I do find it quite surprising and in a way disheartening that more schools and trusts haven't already chosen, when we suggest about 5 strategic priorities for the 3-year or 5-year period, that isn't appearing in strategies as much as we would expect. So in the next academic year, we are going to be in a little bit more of a mission, as it were, to encourage schools and trusts to do that. So it's fabulous that we all seem to be coming together around this, no doubt. COP has got something to do with the fact we are engaging our minds much more. But having a vision that then says this is one of the 5 most important things that our leaders, our governing board needs to be making progress on and monitoring, also then will affect the culture and the behaviours of people within the organisation, staff at all level. People will begin to have these conversations, will say, but what difference does that make to our environmental targets? The point about the school strategy is it needs to be co-constructed. That's a terrible word, but it means built together between the school leadership and the governing board, but with the engagement of all the relevant stakeholders. So clearly pupils, staff, parents, the wider community. And in this case, I think there are lots of interested parties in the wider community. And I wanted to just pause there for a moment and recognize the role that pupil voice has already had in this work. So we were approached by some of our members pre-COVID, so that must have been 2019, when they said to us, come on NGA, you're not talking about sustainability enough. Why do we want to know more? We want to know more because our pupils are asking us and indeed telling us and lobbying us. So I think there were some comments within the questions and chat already about pupil voice, can it make a difference? And I would say you absolutely need to be engaging with the governing board level as well, because when push comes to shove, they are the strategic decision makers within your school or trust. And one of the things we are doing even more of in the autumn term, one of our big themes for the autumn term is around participation. And we're trying to find schools and trusts that have been doing really well in engaging pupils in really meaningful conversations that have then made a difference. So we survey governing boards a lot. We know things like how many of them conduct pupil surveys, how many of them conduct pupil focus groups. But what we don't know so much is what difference does that make? So we're really looking for examples of where, because pupils lobbied or spoke up, the decisions made by school leaders and governing boards were changed. And I think we might find some here around environmental sustainability. The next thing I'm going to put in the chat when I'm finished is a link to the guidance that we wrote for governing boards about how they start having those conversations around environmental sustainability with their school leaders. And we are the experts on school governance in England, but we aren't on everything. So we did this piece of guidance in collaboration with the National Association for Environmental Education. And therefore it builds on their 4 Cs. Campus, interestingly, being one of those, culture, community, and curriculum. And that includes quite a number of questions for governing boards to start those conversations about. And it also includes a few sets of resources for them to have a look at or to refer school leaders to, and we hope to develop that. So we will be updating that resource in the autumn. And I've already just noticed someone earlier on was talking about food, and I'm thinking, oh, I don't think our guidance actually mentions school food. Really good point. So we're on a learning journey here too, and I'm hoping that by working in collaboration with you all, we can improve what we're doing. But my plea really is, if you want to make a difference on this, absolutely engage with governing boards. And if they're not asking you about this subject, you need to tell them that they need to be having this conversation, when we will absolutely, as NGA, support you in doing that. And one tiny thing, just to show that we are trying to walk the walk. When a couple of our members did say, come on NGA, you need to do better, we really had a good look about what we as an organization did. And we send out 40,000 magazines every 2 months to our members, and they were covered in plastic. So I thought, no, this won't do. And we looked into doing compostable covers, but actually they're not terribly good either. So we went naked, as apparently it's called. And you know what, as chief executive, I was a bit worried. I thought lots of my members would start shouting at me because their magazines had been chewed by their dogs as they were delivered. And it's gone really beautifully. We replace any that get damaged in the post, but not many do. So we're thinking about what we can do as an organization as well. So thank you for including me, and I hope to improve the resources as a result of being part of this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Emma. And I was really taken by your point around that we're all learning, and that we all need to share knowledge, etc. So I've got one very small question, and I don't want a long answer because
Sorry.
No, that's fine. And the question is, who's doing it well? Are there good examples of where the governance of a school has been set up to support environmental sustainability? That does give the voices to all those stakeholders you described. Where would I go and find out about that?
So we just happen to know, because of conversations with active members, of, for example, two multi-academy trusts, neither of them in London, the ones that jump to mind, one in Devon and one in Suffolk, where at that point they both had chairs who were really interested in these issues, the chairs of the governing boards, and they pushed the school leaders to be thinking about this quite a long time ago. I mean, I'm now talking, they started doing it 10 years ago. And as a result, in fact, interestingly, they both started with solar panels, but then it became not just a solar panel issue, but a much broader whole school issue. And we have written those up. But what worries me, Paul, is that they're exceptions in the sense that they have become strategic, and it took them quite a long time to become strategic about it. So what we want to do now, with this sort of so much more sort of steam being generated, is actually to get those boards that don't already have a personal commitment to think of this as business as usual. And we can use some of those arguments, such as saving money. We talked about resources, and Jonathan's absolutely right, there isn't enough money around, but we can talk about the savings as well as the expenditure. So I think there's lots of ways of encouraging boards now to take this on board, and then we'll help share that. So if anybody can point us to examples where governing boards have been proactive, we're very happy to disseminate those.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah, no, I agree. Let's make it the default position that regardless of whatever school you're at and the governance structure, these things are considered and need to be. Wonderful. Thank you. Let's move on. And actually your reference to resources, particularly natural resources, leads us to our next panelist. And that's Paul Hampton, who is the Education Manager at Thames Water. And Paul, hopefully, is going to be describing to us why adaptation and resilience matters for schools, and what London and London schools can be doing about it. Over to you, Paul.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. So yeah, I'm Paul. I work in the corporate responsibility team at Thames Water, and my role is to focus on schools' initiatives from environmental through to STEM careers. Yeah, we're delighted to be involved today, and actually for people that are involved throughout the day and some of the other activities, I might see some of my colleagues as well. So yeah, today I want to talk a little bit about climate adaptation and resilience, why it matters for schools, and being from a water company, I'll just be focusing my comments around water and the impact there. I wanted to start talking about resilience and what it means for Thames Water, something we have to take very seriously. We have to consider climate change and resilience as part of delivering, an essential service. We've got a long history as an organisation responsible for looking after London's water and sewage services, going right the way back, pre-Victorian era, with issues of getting waste out of London. Some of you locals might be familiar with Basil Jett and some of his work. But today, resilience really comes down to climate. So Thames Water is a company that serves around a quarter of the UK population. We supply somewhere in the region of 2.7 billion litres of drinking water a day to around about 10 million people. And we treat about 5 billion litres of wastewater for 15 million customers. And that includes additional runoff and infiltration from roads and buildings and so on. Thousands of miles of pipework. I believe the stat is that we're enough to go around the world 3.5 times. And hundreds of operational sites across London and the southeast. We're an environmental business at the heart of what we do by the nature of our product and the way in which we operate. The water we provide comes direct from the environment, obviously, and once our customers have used it, it obviously needs to be safely returned. Preparing for and adapting to climate change for us, along with population growth, are two of the key challenges, not just us, but the whole industry face when delivering, the service our customers need and expect. discussing resilience, and climate resilience is part of everyday practice, part of our plans all the time. When you consider our city gets less rain than Rome, Dallas, or Sydney, so you know, a huge challenge. And in fact, the impacts of climate change are already being felt when we're trying to deliver the service that we do. I actually joined Thames Water from the education sector in 2012, straight into a period of drought, actually followed in the same year by the wettest summer for 100 years. We've seen areas of the Thames Valley suffer significant flooding in 2013-14, causing huge impacts on the sewer network, big problems for the environment and for customers. Then in October 2016 through to about March 2017, we experienced the driest period since 1995. I'm sure plenty of you remember the Beast from the East in early March 2018. Was responsible for us, we call it a freeze thaw event, which resulted in pipes bursting and supply interruptions across London, and then followed by the hottest summer on record in England in 2018. More recently, storms Keir and Dennis in 2020 in quick succession, and again, we're starting to see records being broken this year as well. So climate change is likely to contribute to these extreme weather events, and seemingly we're seeing them more and more frequently. So as I said, this creates huge challenges. Managing excess water during times of heavy rain and flooding is a big, you know, a huge issue for us to deal with as a business, but it's not just us. It's our customers, it's you know, people right across the southeast and in London. And obviously we have to ensure we have water resources to provide a dependable supply of drinking water too. So why do we think it matters for schools, adaptation and resilience? Well, simply put, it matters to schools, it matters to everyone, everywhere. Homes, parks, shops, hospitals, all of our services, our infrastructure is affected by climate change and the impacts of runoff and infiltration and so on. So to make sure we can ensure safe supply and manage all of those kind of impacts, being resilient allows us to continue to fulfill our primary purpose. That's whether in the education sector or the water industry. You know, resilience makes us be able to do what we need to do. And I think ultimately working collaboratively makes this possible. It's some of these challenges we face, it's no one organisation that can solve them. It's about working collaboratively. We've got around about 5,500 schools in the Thames Water region, nearly 60% of which are in Greater London. So in terms of a significant stakeholder, as has been mentioned previously, you know, an entire school or education estate has huge significance in terms of where water is being used, where it's falling as rain, where it pools or floods, and where it drains to. An average domestic roof collects around 85,000 litres of rainwater a year, which fills around about 450 water butts. So if that adds up across a school estate, chain of academies, or you know, a London borough, then you know, the numbers skyrocket. Sustainable drainage solutions has been mentioned already today, in terms of a tool to prevent the impact of more extreme weather events being felt on properties and our rivers. Then they provide, you know, a real tangible solution that offers other benefits: biodiversity, well-being, even learning. So there's opportunity for the education sector to look at SUDS at individual school or sector level to make a positive change to their campus and to mitigate some of the effects felt on the school or local environment following heavy rain and potential flooding. We've seen projects, you know, working partnership that have been successful in the London area. We've run some SUDS for Scene schools, working with the likes of South East Rivers Trust, Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, and the Environment Agency. We've actually been involved in projects over the last few years benefiting the Wandle in South London, Pims Brook in North London, and we hope to be working with the GLA and DFE on some new schools-focused projects in the near future. I think we'll see through some of the regulatory wastewater planning the need to identify more surface area to disconnect from main sewers. That's only going to grow in the coming years. And I think really the water industry and the education sector need to make sure that they're talking and those discussions are turning into actions that will benefit all parties involved. I think with my education hat on, schools also offer a unique environment to take a closer look at why adaptation and resilience matter from a water resources and behavioural point of view. I think from 2024, we're expecting the government to require the water industry to plan to deliver resilience to 1 in 500-year drought. And we can't rely on rain because of increasing unpredictable weather. We can't make more water from, we can't take more water from our rivers because we need to protect our environment. And when we consider water resources, you know, again, our regulatory framework requires us to look at infrastructure, such as reservoirs and water transfer schemes, and to tackle leakage. But there's also a need to look at shortfall with demand reduction and behaviour change. And ultimately, we want to see wastage seen as a negative behaviour, just like dropping litter or wasting energy. I think the campus, the school campus, can play a part in helping nudge behaviour in a more sustainable direction, along with adapting or adopting more hidden water efficient technology and fixes, you know, that reduce wastage and cost as well. Currently, customers use an average of around about 143 litres every day, and we could see you know, that reduced through the environment bill to, you know, potentially having targets around 110 litres. So I think that will help sharpen focus. But there are schemes in place now, such as we refer to them as smarter business visits, where we can send a team of plumbers in to help reduce leakage around the school. But there's also those cultural shifts, you know, programs like Eco Schools, which identify water as a theme for the school community to take a closer look at. Emma mentioning, you know, previously governing bodies having a look, making a focus on sustainability is really key. You know, certainly from a budgetary point of view, a leaky loo can waste on average of around 400 litres a day, which equates to about £300 a year. So again, looking at the school estate more broadly, there's real gains to be made there from a sustainable and a financial position as well. So hopefully that gives a flavour of what resilience means from our perspective and how schools might consider water from a resilience and adaptation point of view. You know, there's more in the discussion around reducing energy. You know, treating water is hugely energy intensive, and obviously there's a carbon footprint there. But that's, you know, probably part of another discussion another time.
Thank you, Paul. That was excellent. I'm just thinking, you know, keeping it simple, what would be, you know, and understanding the relationship that a school could have with a utility provider such as Thames Water, or we've got people in the audience who are, you know, associated with schools outside the London or the Thames region. What would be your, you know, number one bit of expert advice about what a school can usefully do or how it can engage with a water utility company?
Well, you know, just to start the conversation, certainly we've got teams that can manage that, whether it comes through the education programme, which, you know, all you've got to do is Google our water efficiency team that run the smarter business visits, for example. You know, their contact details are available online as well. So there's a conversation that can start. I think collaborating with your local authority or academy chain allows a bigger voice as you know, that kind of estate gets bigger. So engaging in that discussion, you know, wherever possible. But I think I wanted to echo, going back to Emma Howard Boyd right at the beginning, that mentioned the document that Thames were involved with producing the GLA, the Reimagining Rainwater in Schools. If anyone wants a bit of inspiration to see what can be done on a school site, that's a great document that highlights some practical tips and some great examples of what can be done.
Perhaps we could someone could kindly put that up as a link on the chat. That would be wonderful. Okay, yeah. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your contribution, Paul. Looking forward to hearing your views for the wider questions that are coming in. Let's move on to our next participant, or panelist, I should say, and that's Harriet Lamb, who is the Chief Executive of Ashden, and also the inspiration behind the Let's Go Zero campaign. So over to you, Harriet.
Thanks very much, Paul, and good morning, everybody. So yes, I'm from Ashden, and Let's Go Zero, the wildly ambitious campaign that seeks to see how can all 32,000 schools across the UK reach zero carbon by 2030. And because we're wildly ambitious, I'm also going to try and share my screen and share a PowerPoint with you. So perhaps, Paul, you can let me know if you can see that. Is that working?
I can, yes. Yeah, if you could maybe just put it onto presentation view.
How do I get rid of, that's what I'm
so
trying to do.
It's
I
just
can't get rid of the bar at the top. Got it. Here we go. got it, and there we go. So, the campaign for all levels to reach zero
Harriet,
carbon
just one moment.
by 2030.
Harriet, just one moment.
Yes.
We're seeing a display setting.
Yes.
So if you go where you see display settings, if you click there, you'll have an opportunity to click there and to press duplicate slideshow. And then
better?
I think we'll wait, and then we should see it. There we go. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
It's right on my screen. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your role as a guide on the IT as well as chair. Let me get rid of that as well. And so at Ashden, we've worked with schools for many, many years. And over the time, we realised the extent to which schools are such centres of our community that you have every day 10 million people going through the school gate, and that 42% of all households have people in school, and that means the school ground, the campus that we're discussing today, can be a real ripple effect from which schools can take the leadership within the wider community. And we've seen that leadership already coming from young people. And we felt that here was a wonderful opportunity that we can, through the schools, really being a pathfinder sector in society. And yet there are many, many challenges that we face. Most of our school buildings are old, and we expect the majority of them to still be in use in 2050. And so that's going to be a major challenge to look at. And we also looked across where is all the different carbon footprint within schools. And of course, there's a big chunk that is the buildings and that is the wider campus. And then, as has been mentioned, there are also the other issues around from procurement through to water or waste. And on the other hand, we knew through our experience, not only was there extraordinary energy among the young people to do something on climate change, and a hunger among teachers and school leadership, including governors, to respond. On the other hand, teachers feel overworked, they feel overburdened, they're experts often in education, and feel an enormous burden to then respond to all these different areas, some of which look quite technical. And at the same time, they felt they didn't have the mandate that they need from Ofsted, nor indeed the funding, as has been mentioned, to take on some of the more ambitious actions that they need to within their schools. And they also felt, as has been mentioned, that there were a plethora of schemes, and where on earth could they begin to respond to them all? And so we pulled together a coalition of many of the leading organisations already working on sustainability issues with schools to say, how can we help come together to form a package for schools with WWF, or working on biodiversity. Sustrans, of course, worked for years on helping encourage children to cycle or walk to school, or the Soil Association, really encouraging schools to source local food. And so we came together and said, actually, a pathway to zero carbon would have to cover all these 7 pillars with curriculum overarching them all. And that we therefore launched the campaign, Let's Go Zero 2030, encouraging schools to sign up to say, yes, I want to take action. So far, I'm delighted to say, since we launched very recently, 375 schools have signed up. That's representing about 200,000 pupils and teachers, with a very good, strong contingent from London, particularly led, I have to say, Lewisham and Southwark doing especially well there. And schools who sign up say, yes, we're already taking action on the climate, and we want to take more. And we would like to be zero carbon by 2030. We're going to do everything within our powers to do that, and we're calling on the government to help us, give us the mandate and give us the resources so that we can go all the way to zero carbon by 2030, which is why I have to say I really welcome all that Jonathan was saying about a strategy coming out for schools on climate change. And so the campaign has got strong sign up from schools as well as from many organisations supporting them, for example, from the National Education Union, supporting the campaign through to the Church of England, who of course have 4,500 schools all of whom they're encouraging to join the campaign, as well as from local authorities. We've had over 30 local authorities saying they would like to support all the schools in their areas to join the campaign as well, in order both to take action and give that mandate for government. I really loved what Emma said. It is absolutely about the young people being in the lead, but it's also about the school leadership. And that's why for a school to sign up, it has to be somebody like the head or the chair of governors who signs up. So you've really got that serious commitment to take it forward. And we know that schools then need the resources to go forward. And above all else, they're inspired by other schools and the examples of what other schools are doing. So we've really sought through the press and through the website to highlight what different schools are doing so that one school can take inspiration from another. And that will all then be put into a toolkit that will be on the website, the Global Action Plan website, where people can go in and see, well, if I've taken this step already and I want to focus now on doing more on food or on the buildings or on the playground, they can see some of the next steps that they can take. So just to give one example, you can see there Matilda from St Saviour's School in Richmond, where, to give one example, they decided they were wasting too much food. So every day they started weighing the food that was thrown away. They did lots of maths and graphs to show how much food was wasted. And then they calculated how much their geography teacher weighed and came to the school assembly and said, wasting every week 1.5 times Mr. Smith. And as a consequence, the school really started cutting back on school waste. And so it's concrete examples like that, but put within a wider systemic shift that we believe can help inspire schools to take action. Here's another brilliant school, St Winifred's School in Lewisham, where they teamed up with a firm of local architects. And first of all, they tracked with the children, with the whole assembly, looking at, well, where are our emissions coming from and what are the things we could perhaps do to reduce those emissions if we're going to reach our target to have a zero carbon plan. And they put that together through a lot of workshops with the children to work out what was the way, what are the next steps that they needed to take. And I love the quote from one of the pupils that said, "We're changing the world, people. We're changing the world one school at a time." And it's examples like that from schools inspiring other schools and engaging with their local communities that we believe could enable all schools to reach zero carbon by 2030. That would include the young people coming out with a new vision and ready to engage and actually lead the country towards zero carbon. And indeed, having those skills for the future, we believe, is also part of the key role that can be played, as well as the estate being retrofitted, ready for 2030. So I hope that many of you will consider signing up to the campaign.
Wonderful. Thank you, Harriet. That was really inspirational. I think what we're going to do as probably the first question when we go into the plenary session is to talk about net zero carbon by when. So Jonathan, be ready. There's some questions already in the Q&A that are asking for maybe a little bit more ambition around the timeline for that. So that will, but before we get to that, I'd like to introduce our final panelist, who is Charles Pipe. And it's really great because actually, we've heard from policy, we've heard from water companies, we've heard from organisations. Now we're getting down into the nitty-gritty and to schools in a council, and the Council of Hounslow, because Charles's role, if I can find my notes, let me get it correct. In fact, I've just moved them. Oh, here we go. Yes. So Charles is the energy manager for Hounslow Council. So over to you, Charles.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Paul, and thank you for inviting me to share some of my practical examples. So I've been asked today to share practical examples of Hounslow's successful local authority and school energy partnership projects and lessons learned, and also how the school estate can deliver climate dividends. So I'd like to take you on a sort of short journey on how Hounslow Council has been successful in decarbonising our schools. Albeit not a school, our first success was way back in 2015, where we installed a 1.7 megawatt solar array consisting of 6,000 plus panels and 60 kilowatts of lithium storage batteries. This was at the Western International Market, and London's premier fresh produce wholesale market, and owned by the council. And this was also our biggest, by far, electricity consuming site. The installation at the time was the UK's largest local authority solar scheme, now generating half the site's electricity requirement, while a saving of £250,000 per year, which is phenomenal. 150,000 of that was from the conventional grid costs, by self-generating from the solar panels, with £100,000 from the feed-in tariff. Of course, you probably know the FITS incentive has been since removed. So next came education. So via the carbon reduction commitment, which again is gone, it was recognised that 70% of our total carbon emissions were from schools. Now, actually, speaking to my colleagues in London, I think this is typical. In every borough, 70% is from the schools. So a major problem for everyone, really. So Hounslow, we set a goal to make its schools the greenest in London. To date, with all the work done on lighting, solar PV, building management systems in 23 schools, and financed by an interest Selex loan, free interest Selex loan, the goal has been achieved. We've made huge strides in schools with the average energy savings of 30%, releasing cash for frontline services. One school actually cut its electricity bill by 64%. So there's lots of low-lying fruit out there and easy savings to be made. And also the comfort of the building is so much better with improved lighting, and of course the schools love their new green credentials, especially from having some PV on the roof. So now we've got a second phase. It's now up and running to improve the heating systems, and we're using air source heat pumps here. So we went back to the 23 schools that we had already done works in, and we're fully retrofitting another 10 more. And we're doing that through 7.7 million of funding successfully secured through the public sector decarbonisation scheme. That's PSDS. It's a government grant, so no repayments as like the old Selex loan. And as a percentage of the 33 schools, that's over 60% of our total school portfolio. This excludes academies. So moving on, I thought it would be useful to break this presentation down into sort of 3 sections. So the challenges and barriers experienced, best practice approach, and benefits to transforming schools to a zero carbon future. So challenges and barriers. So we had to understand as a local authority that every school setup is different, which means developing the relationship and engagement with the right person is key from the onset. There are multiple stakeholders, obviously, in 33 schools, so important to know who to engage with in the school. For instance, we recognise that some schools have keen green champions in the form of premise managers, site managers, school business managers, or head teachers as well. So it's good to get them on board and be part of the journey. So from the start, we recognise that there's a need to demonstrate a clear vision and objective and value of this project to the stakeholders. So presentations were arranged at many forums, for example, school business manager forums, school governors forums, and bulletin letters sent to school heads. So we tried very hard to get the message out to everyone, so nobody didn't miss anyone. So we also made sure that the key aspects of offer were understood. For example, free surveys, reduced energy consumption, cost reduction, guaranteed kilowatt and carbon savings, and this is all at no capital cost to the school. For all funding was at the time via a Selex interest, a free Selex, an interest-free loan with annual savings as the repayments. Now we have free Selex grants with no repayments, as in the PSDS. So other challenges, barriers were having access to accurate baseline, like data have to go forward from. So, and many schools were on different contractual arrangements with different providers here, there, and everywhere. But most of Hounslow schools were on the laser, the council's corporate contract with laser. So most of that data I had at my fingertips. Maybe one or two schools weren't on it, but we made the engagement and we got the information required. So then we had to sort of demonstrate clearly which technologies were eligible, and mainly the big four are air source heat pumps, solar PV, LED, and battery storage, and also demonstrate the analysis and the design of the project going forward. Again, we're procuring and appointing the correct energy saving company was an issue, but the refit framework, I don't know if you've heard of this, it's via the GLA, is a vehicle set up for this. Now I've used this 3 or 4 times now, and I believe it's the best framework out there. Now, the refit team, they offer free technical advice from industry experts. It's a ready-made procurement, OJU compliant, and as I said earlier, comes with guaranteed energy and carbon savings from the 16 ESCOs that are on the framework. So there was a need to understand the specification documents, the IGPs, which is the sort of final survey after all the work's been done, all the data's been gathered, warranties, performance guarantees on products, which enables all aspects of the project efficiency and savings outcomes to be achieved. So complex decision making to be made, and also at the time, who sanctions the actual project final go ahead? The ESCO and the LA local authority must emphasise the offer to offer complete support from start to finish, making sure there's no extra pressure on the school business managers, premise managers, etc., taking their time away from other school priorities. So also there was a need to arrange energy workshops, walkthroughs for the schools, so they're taken on the journey every step of the way. So they've got a detailed awareness of the proposed delivery, reducing any anxiety on reliability of the new technologies. So clear management and scheduling programs agreed to avoid and minimize disruption at installation stage, and any extra cost of service to maintain the new measures was another question that came our way. So that's quite a few challenges, quite a few barriers, but every one of them was sort of resolved, and we're in a really good position now. So best practice approach, communication, it is absolute key. So it's everything really. So from single point of contact from the local authority or the ESCO is absolutely essential. So what we did, we appointed a schools liaison officer to make the contact between the ESCO, the LA, and the school. Now I feel that was key going forward. The whole project must be fully aligned in messaging with the local authority's energy manager, energy team, so we can advise the school on any queries, any misunderstanding. We're there at all times to answer these questions. Also, we need to understand the school's strategic decision-making process, because they're all different. Ensure the submitted proposal to the school, that's the IGP, that's the final document, regarding all the savings, that the measures that are going in are are easy to read and to understand, and it saves them money. So it's really essential to make contact and talk through, thus gain confidence in what measures are to be installed and the dividends thereafter. We're at a stage now that we can offer business managers, head teachers from previously delivered schools as a reference. So that's a really good way forward. If any other schools have got any issues, not sure this is the way to go, we can now offer, especially school business managers and heads, they can go forward and have that discussion with them. Also, we had to be flexible in programming the installation around school needs. So most of the work's done over the weekends, holiday periods. We aggregated the best technologies and solutions that together provide the best commercial returns. And also, after the first year of installation, a free M&V exercise is carried out to verify and validate savings. The ESCO and the LA keep in contact after delivery to ensure the school are happy, and this leads to a sort of proud legacy and sharing good case studies with other schools. And we've got those case studies now that we can share with other schools in London or over the UK. So lastly, benefits to transforming schools to for a carbon zero future. So it enables a significant contribution to the objective of decarbonising building greener schools that reap the economic records of a clean growth revolution. It improves air quality while eliminating health and social inequalities and costs associated with them. Again, it said guaranteed energy kilowatts and carbon savings via the refit framework terms and conditions. It's a reduction in overall energy bills, so you'll save money, and to be able to say your schools are taking part and are committed to the journey towards carbon zero. So in summary, 4 points to take away. You can use the refit framework as a procurement vehicle. Via the refit, you're offered a free survey, so you can obtain expert advice from the ESCO to eradicate any doubt, any perceived risk before any financial commitment is made. The PSTS grants via Selex to Fund Works are free with no repayment, and I believe the next grant announcement is going to be this November. So you'll need to have the necessary data required at your fingertips to be able to successfully bid for these grants. So in readiness, and your work needs to start now. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Charles. That was really insightful. And indeed, in the chat, I think some people are saying, where can we go for more information? Are there case studies available? What I'd like to do now, we've got about 12, 14 minutes left, somewhere around that, is focus on maybe 2 key themes that are coming through from the Q&A. In addition to that, can all the panelists please just have a look at the Q&A? Because there are a couple of really simple questions that have come directly to panelists, and it would be great if you could just answer there and then, and that closes off those questions. Particularly, I think there was one around governance. But I want to focus firstly on the time frame that we've got and 2030. So Jonathan, you mentioned that net zero carbon by 2050, and so I'd just like to understand, is it at all possible for a government department to set targets that are more aggressive and could potentially, hopefully, be delivered at a far quicker rate compared to other departments? Or do you have to hang back and wait? Could we not go early? Why have you got, let's go zero and people talking about 2030? Why is it 2050 with the Department for Education?
So firstly, I absolutely love the ambition of 2030. There's no lack of enthusiasm for people to go faster on this agenda. And as I said, this is a very opportune moment to speak to people here because we're in the strategy development phase. And as I said when I was speaking, our 4 aims are there to be refined and improved on as we talk to ministers and others. On the point of net 2050, well, that's the government's current legislative commitment for the country and just forms our sort of starting point. Like anything, the really big things that make a dent into carbon emissions across education have already been talked about quite a lot here today, isn't it? It's whether it's the travel to school, whether it's the heating and everything else. And the retrofitting is a very, very expensive thing to do if you do it at a very large scale. So we're putting forward options for government to consider to do things faster and to invest more money in things like retrofitting. However, of course, that goes through a whole government process, which is called a spending review, which there's one due to happen this year. So we'll be putting forward business cases, and that's part of my job, is to write those business cases to try and secure as much money from the Treasury as possible for this agenda. If we can secure that money, we can come out publicly and say, do you know what, we've got the funding, and we think we can go faster. At this stage of the game, I couldn't say we could go faster because we haven't secured the resources. I think that'd be foolish of me. So I totally agree with the aspiration, and all of us in the sort of sustainability and climate change team are pushing for this because we're passionate and we believe it's the right thing to do. So it's a bit of a watch this space, really. If we can come out and say 2030 or earlier, of course we will. But we've got to back it up with a strategy and a set of plans that can be delivered. There's no point just saying an ambition with nothing to back it up. And I think we should be transparent and open about what is achievable with the sort of money that we have available. And if I could just steal one more second, because Charles mentioned the public sector decarbonisation scheme. Schools, 25% of all public sector emissions, yet the number of grants that go out, far less than 25% of the value of the grants go to schools. So any encouragement to schools to really look into that scheme and about how you can bid into that. Because we're pressing BAYS, which is the government department who runs that scheme, we're pressing hard to get more of that money to schools, so it gets at least its fair share out of that scheme.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Totally understand the important point about credibility and having evidence behind whatever strategy and timeline you set. Can I just bring in Charles now, though, because many London boroughs have set climate emergencies. The Mayor of London's already set a commitment for London to be net zero carbon. So where does Hounslow sit within all that, and how can you set maybe more aggressive targets, and particularly for schools?
Well, I think, Paul, because we engaged probably 6-7 years ago with the refit, and we've got a good rapport with Turner & Townsend and refit, so they've been very helpful in the journey, and we were the first London Borough to take up the schools refit programme. Now, I'm not sure what other boroughs are doing at the present moment, but I know that because we started early, we had the data at our fingertips. Obviously, a necessity for any project going forward, having the baseline data. We had that. So when these bids come out, they were classed as shovel ready. The announcement came, and the closure of the bid was 6 weeks later. So if you weren't prepared and you didn't have that data at your fingertips, you were never going to get that bid. So I think I've mentioned in my summary, schools and local authorities have got to get together, collect that data to be in readiness for the next announcement coming through. We reckon there's going to be another PSDS 3 coming out in November. Pretty convinced that's coming our way. We came away from the Celix loan scheme now. It's a grant, so there should be no anxiety about how we're going to pay it back. It's free. So I just feel, yeah, we got in front because we started early, and I think other London boroughs are catching up now, because obviously I sit in quite a few London energy forums, and I know that some other London boroughs have got some funding, but not maybe as much as Hounslow as such. But I think now we all need to be prepared for these bids coming at us, and as I say, they're shovel ready.
But how important is it for local authorities to actually have energy teams and experts and have capacity? Because I'm pretty sure that maybe Hounslow's quite fortunate in having your expertise, but that's not the same for other boroughs and for other local authorities around England, Wales, and other places.
Yeah, it's very important. I truly believe that the local authority brings a sort of confidence to the schools, a trust to the schools. They're not just going out and dealing with the energy saving company. So that it's the whole partnership of bringing in the experts. The council, is scrutinising, looking at what's been proposed, making sure the specifications are of a real good standard. So it's absolutely imperative that you've got a great energy team within the council to take the schools on the journey.
So let's just wind that question out. I mean, have any of you, what do you do when you don't have that energy team working in local boroughs? I mean, so for your Let's Go Zero campaign, Harriet, how will you engage with schools or with the local authorities if that capacity is limited?
Well, I think that's right. It is one of the gaps, and that's why we really welcome what Jonathan's saying about laying out a pathway to support schools, because many schools are nervous to engage with these issues and do feel they're technical and complicated, and that you do meet a number of hurdles along the way, whichever way you go through it, and that's all taking time from busy, very hard-pressed teachers or governors. So I think that the more that both local authorities can do, but also that the department can do to support schools, the better. And I would just really welcome Jonathan's openness to thinking about those more ambitious targets, because we really think that schools could be that pathfinder sector within the public sector that really will capture people's imagination and help encourage retrofit throughout the country and help build up those skills that we need. It's one of the gaps we face in retrofit, is having enough people and enough companies with the skills throughout the country to deliver. And that's where schools as part of the public sector could be real leaders. I'd also just like to respond to one of the points in the chat about having a sustainability governor, which is obviously for Emma to answer, but we also believe, and I would really hope the Department of Education would consider that, it is having a sustainability lead in every school. Because I think if you had that one point of contact who knew it, whose responsibility it was, in a local authority where there perhaps wasn't the kind of amazing, as it says in the chat, legendary work that Charles has done, when you don't have someone like that, you've at least got one person in the school who can build up the knowledge, the expertise and the contacts to navigate their way through some of the complexities. Okay, that's wonderful. I'm conscious of the time. We need to close at 12. That gives us just a couple of minutes. I think we have touched on funding quite a bit, although we haven't asked questions directly to you, but I think in your responses around the PSDS, if I've got that correct, the acronym and other things, and there is a session later on around finance. So for those of you on the session today in the audience, forgive me, we're going to leave that. So we've got to wrap up really. So if there would be one word as an action or an adjective that we need, what would it be to solve this for the schools? So I'm going to ask you, and if you don't know the word, don't worry. But let's just quickly go from Paul. Paul, what would you say? What would you be asking for? What do we need?
I think from my point of view, collaboration, finding new ways to collaborate.
Perfect, collaboration.
Today's a good example.
Harriet?
Ambition.
Jonathan?
I'm going for collaboration as well.
Like that. Charles? Passion, enthusiasm.
Passion behind what you're doing.
Wonderful. What about you, Emma?
I want to cheat. I want to say both strategy and action, because it's no good having a strategy that's just a piece of paper.
You don't need the rationale. Listen, I think all of you have demonstrated passion, enthusiasm, expertise, and also a willingness to collaborate for being here today. So all that really remains is for me to thank you very much for your insights and for your contributions today, and hand back to the co-chairs. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. You are a vindication of why we have brought you together, because there was such richness, expertise and insight into everything that you said, and we're very glad that this is recorded so that the session will be shared with a wider public, all the stakeholders, the other stakeholders that have already been mentioned. So I would just like to bring this session to a close now with my deep thanks to Paul and to each of the speakers. And we will move forward at 12 o'clock punctually to our next session, which will be on curriculum. So thank you, and we'll join you again in the next session at midday. Thank you. Bye-bye.